What's up, guys? Today we're going to be going over the Hunter melee build. This build was a mistake. It is so broken and maybe one of the best builds of all time. One of the highest melee damage builds, one of the best accurate builds. Then you could swap over to one of the best DPS builds in the game, also all on the same subclass on one character. And in this video, we're going to be breaking down the full combo, comparing Synthoceps to Liar's Handshake, seeing which one is the better option on the exotic class item. So starting off with the old classic Hunter combo, combination blow and gamer's dodge. Looking at the damage on Carl, it's gonna hit for 8,000. Then with combination blow times 3 by getting a final blow, dodging, final blow, dodging, final blow. These stacks will last for 20 seconds, so you'll always have these stacks at all times in the game. Very easy to get, and this is gonna be a 4.1x modifier. Then we also have Stylish Executioner, which will not only allow us to go invis, your first melee coming out of invis will weaken the target, and it doesn't say this, but it will also do more damage, which is going to be a huge factor for the Syntho versus Liars conversation. And this, once you come out of invis, not only will it weaken, it will also do 3x damage and apply the 15% void weaken. Then we also have Courage on a Fragment to make our light abilities do more damage to targets affected by darkness debuffs, and we'll also be using Winter Shroud for this combo, which will not only allow us to take advantage of Courage, it will also feed into Stylish Executioner and make us invis. Look at this is going to be a 1.1x, so a 10% increase to our arc melee damage once the enemy is slowed or frozen. Then we also have 1-2 punch. 1-2 punch in combination with everything else going on will be a 2x melee increase, so pretty nice. And since our first melee is the one that's going to do a lot of damage, instead of waiting for the void weaken after the first melee, you could use Tractor to pre-apply it, which will be a 30% debuff, and this will take the damage to over 300,000 on Carl. So now the question is, on the new exotic class item, Synthoceps or Liar's Handshake. So first with the Synthoceps, this will work the exact same way as on Titan, where once you're surrounded by 3 or more enemies, you'll get the enhancements. Then if you are no longer surrounded, it will linger for 5 seconds, which is pretty nice. And looking at the damage increase of just Syntho, it's going to be a 2.65x, but in the full combination, it doesn't stack fully, and it only stacks at 1.3x, taking damage to almost 400,000. Now with Liar's Handshake, which I farmed all day and somehow dodged getting it on the new exotic cloak, but on it, it has all the same functionality as Liar's Handshake minus the healing part. So just damage testing with this instead for me. Looking at damage on Carl, this one will be higher than Syntho at a full 3x damage increase, but it's going to be only every other melee. Or if you first get meleeed, you can do it on every melee, but obviously that won't happen like on a boss fight. And depending on the boss attack, sometimes it doesn't even proc it, so it's kind of funky. But overall, every other melee will get that 3x increase. And that is kind of an issue with Stylish Executioner, because the bulk of our damage will be the first melee coming out of invis, and we won't have the counter punch on that melee unless we first get meleeed by someone else. The proc it going into the target, so it's going to be a lot harder to actually have the full combo going with this on your first melee compared to Syntho will always be there. But if you can get all the stars to align, it hits for over 640,000. So looking at damage of your first melee with the 3 different combinations, with Outliers it was 305, with Syntho it goes up to almost 400k. Then with the full combo of counter punch and everything else, 640,000, obviously by far the highest. So if we just compare for our first melee, the Syntho will be more consistent at roughly that 400,000 number. Then with Liar's Handshake, if you do have counter punch ready, it will be obviously by far the highest damage. But even without the counter punch ready, it still isn't that much lower than Syntho, still doing over 300,000. And for most things in the game, I think you're going to find that that will still kill them. While on average, Syntho would probably be higher for your first melee, I think the Liar's Handshake at worst isn't that much lower, and at best is a lot higher. So really, I think it's worth the trade-off, because even without counter punch, I think you're going to be doing more than enough damage already. So just the upside of you potentially having the counter punch is just worth it. And another way we can compare these is what about after the first melee, once you're no longer invis. So if we look at that with the Syntho, without being invis and the full combo, it's going to be hitting for 132,000 every single melee. Then with the Liar's Handshake, the first melee will be lower as expected at 100,000, but the second one will be a lot higher at 213,000, which means if we average out the two melees and kind of get like effective damage per melee for Liars, it's higher than that of the Synthoceps at 157,000 compared to 132,000. So over multiple melees, Liar's Handshake is better and has the potential of being the highest damage on your first melee also. And even if you don't have counter punch on first melee, it's not that much further behind Synthoceps, to the point where I'm kind of team Liar's Handshake. I think the upsides of Liar's Handshake outweigh the slightly less damage on your first melee if you don't have counter punch. And moving on, we can also use Transference from the artifact, where we'll have increased grenade and melee damage while Transcendent. So doing that with the full combo, which took me a little while to actually get right, hits for 705,000, which is quite a lot. That's going to be a 1.1x increase. But the one that's better and a lot easier to use will be Shield Crush, where when you have Woven Metal, Frost Armor, or a Void Overshield, your melee recharges faster and deals increased damage. We can do this very easily with this artifact mod right here, or by using Purpose, which will give us a elemental resist when we pick up an orb. You have to use Strand, Void, or Stasis to make this work with the artifact mod. And looking at damage there, this will be a 1.25x increase, or a 25%er, which we will have all the time in this build by using these mods right here. So if you don't know, you can stack multiple copies of Heavy Handed, where with just one, it takes 10 seconds to create an orb. With two, the cooldown becomes 5 seconds, and with all three, it becomes 1 second. So we'll be creating orbs all over the place with this build. Then on our cloak, we have Powerful Attraction. That way, if we don't pick up the orb when we create it, dodging will just give it to us for free. That takes the total damage of this melee combo with everything involved to 881,000, or a 101.5x total increase, which is, you know, just a little bit of damage. Everything doesn't die in one melee. And not only did we do such high damage with our melee, pairing in the left with either Syntho or Liars, we can use Caliban, where powered melee final blows trigger an ignition. So now we take one of the highest damage melee builds of all time, and now just add in ignitions on every single melee hit. It doesn't have to be your actual charge. As long as you have your melee charge, you can use the base melee too, and it will create the ignition. So we take melees that do 400 to like 800,000 damage, and now just give them also ignition, which will clear everything nearby. And this build just feels like you're straight up cheating. You one hit everything in the game. Every single melee is a charged melee because of Combination Blow and Gambler's Dodge. So yeah, I don't know what else you could ever want from a build. Like, why would you use the Consecration build on Titan, which does like a third of the damage, and you have to get your melee charge back every single time, where with this we just have infinite melees that do more damage and cause the same amount of ignitions. So yeah, this build was just a mistake. And looking at the rest of the build, you could use Grapple or Duskfield. I'm kind of swapping between them right now. Duskfield, you could take advantage of Courage more often, and Grapple would just be better for like movement and things like that. And the reason Grapple isn't like a must pick is because one, it does not stack with Combination Blow on this build. The melee damage does not go up. And the reason is because a bulk of our damage is from coming out of invisibility with Stylus Executioner, and with this, when we grapple, it takes you out of invis, so you lose that damage also. Overall, not great. And looking at the rest of the build in our fragments, first we have Blessing, which is very important to start health regen every single time we get a melee final blow. Then we have Purpose to get the elemental resist, to get that 25% from our artifacts. Then we also have Courage, which will be the 10% from slowing an enemy with Winter Shroud or our Duskfield. Then we also have Dawn to become Radiant on every single power melee hit. And we have Bravery to give our Strand Weapon Unraveling Rounds on power melee final blows. So I'm using a demo Strand Weapon. There's a lot of great options. You could use the Call and just rock double special. Most of the time you're going to be meleeing in this build, so you'll never run out of ammo. That won't be an issue. You could also use Balance instead, but I think the Unraveling Rounds are just better and will feed into Stylus Executioner and make us go invis. And if you want the 25% from the artifact, you have to use the Stasis, Void, or Strand Super, which isn't a big deal. You can just make 2 loadouts, one being this, then one being the Marksman Golden Gun, which I'll be making a video on that build next, and comparing Nighthawk to Star Eaters and things like that. And finally, looking at the mods on this build, first off, with triple heavy-handed, I do think this is the best things to use, but it's kind of weird because you don't have the kickstart mod on your gauntlets, which is usually what you do with your armored charges. So instead, I just threw on some surges matching the call. You could also match it to your power weapon if you wanted. That way we have something to take advantage of the charges. I have Dynamo, a Siphon, and Hands On. I have Charged Up and an Innervation to help get our grenade back. Then I have Bomber, Powerful Attraction, and Reaper to create even more orbs. And overall, the gameplay loop is simply just melee, dodge, melee, dodge, melee, dodge. And before you know it, all your melees will be doing like 300 to like 800k damage. And every single melee will also cause ignition, which will just clear the entire room. So, as I said, what else would you want from a build? One of the highest melee damage builds of all time, with also some of the best ad clear of all time, with truly infinite ignitions that will just clear everything nearby. Also, you're just going invis the entire time, slowing enemies, and your first melee coming out of invisibility will weaken a target, just in case if they don't die from the melee. You know, they take 15% more damage, and you can finish them off even easier. So yeah, this build was just truly a mistake. I don't really see a purpose if you're playing the game as optimal as possible to use any other character or any other build in the game. That is just how good this is. Oh, and don't worry, once you get to a boss fight, you can click a different loadout and use Still Hunt with Nighthawk, and also have the best boss DPS in the game. So yeah, let me know what you think about this build down below, and Prismatic Hunter in general. Like usual, thanks for watching. Catch you guys next time.